Humans, plants and rocks are all connected through elements that were formed in stars. And when a star exploded and created the Earth, literally that stardust is what we're all made of. That is a sort of a philosophy that drives me to make this work because of a fundamental chemical connection, almost a spiritual connection through this understanding of how I am related to other things on Earth. So plants do have a story to tell, and the chemistry that's retained within these narratives is also a part of human elemental chemistry and elemental life. I have always loved plants. As a child, I would climb trees. I had a jacaranda tree in my backyard growing up and spent most of my time in it. And at high school, I was really into biology and chemistry. When I started university, I'd actually gone to the wrong interview and I ended up in the ceramics department somehow, rather than the painting studio that I thought I was joining. And this was really quite serendipitous because ceramics really, combined my love of art and science. I'm just fascinated by the ability of ceramics to sort of be able to present information to us that we normally wouldn't be able to see with our own eyes. When I make the ash glazes or glazes from raw materials, I'm surprised every time when I open the kiln. I love all the glazes that I've ever produced. From the archive that I've been working on since 2014, I think there's something like around 45 different site-specific glazes, mainly from the ashes of plants. There's also glazes made from salt, from abandoned termite mounds, and other rock. Each plant from every project has a different glaze aesthetic based on where it's grown and the conditions of the environment there that have been absorbed by that plant over time and then retained within the ashes. I think that the expression of that information through glazes is really profound. It's an alternative type of science. Forest actually presents 11 different coal ash glazes from 11 power stations in Australia. The timeline itself across the wall actually spans from 18 million years with the brown coals in Victoria to 300 million years ago with the black coals in New South Wales and Queensland. Brown coal is younger than black coal, and it still retains a lot of minerals that actually sort of produce the more vibrant, rich glaze colours. And these black coals are some of the oldest in Australia that have lost all of their mineral plant-like qualities. I really love the sort of pale ghostliness of some of those older black coals, and considering the kind of depth of time that is in that glaze, it really blows my mind. I'm fascinated by coal. It's this material that has harnessed the energy of sunlight. It's kept this deep within the earth for millions of years. And then it has re-entered the narrative of our current time through the excavation of these millions years deep time periods. So at once you have this line that represents this sort of ancient forest of geological time and strata. And then as a byproduct of industrial coal burning, it has been redistributed on the earth to contribute to the definition of a new geological age that involves human intervention or contribution and become part of the narrative of the Anthropocene, almost like the afterlife of these forests. Forest is actually quite a big turning point in my practice, going from plant ash glazes, then to coal ash glazes, and then diving even further into geological time, looking at extinction events. So we're currently in the midst of Earth's sixth mass extinction event, the so-called Anthropocene. And over the past 200 to 300 years, since sort of industrial revolution, humanity has contributed to this geological record through various interventions. So the Anthropocene is proposed as a man-made mass extinction event compared to the previous 5. And the Industrial Revolution was actually fueled by raw materials that were being produced through slavery. And then these raw materials, which were turned into products through the factories of Manchester, then helped the British Empire and other European empires develop the wealth that they needed to further colonise other parts of the globe. Not only did the British colonise Australia, also South Asia, and my mum's family actually comes from Sri Lanka and is tied into the colonial history. The Mersey and Irwell catchment, which is the river system of Manchester, as well as the ship canal, the Manchester Ship Canal that joins Liverpool Port to Manchester, was a very significant waterway for the industrialisation of Manchester and the globe. The casts that you see in the work Manchester Driftwood, these are cast from driftwood that I've dragged out of the Manchester Ship Canal. I've used the ash of the original plants to actually make that glaze. I was inspired to create this work in a eddy-like whirlpool fashion because the timbers that I collected, the branches, had sort of all gathered up against the banks. And it just reminded me of this formation, which I also think of in relation to time, this sort of cyclical idea of time, and this continuum as well of the elements through nature and in the soil that then transfer into plants. That has, in this case, become the ash glazes of these works. In the environment, all of these elements are sort of continually cycling into each other as time passes. The reason I'm looking at the past extinction events in light of the chemistry of our current environmental crisis is to just express how deep these narratives go in Earth's history. Chicxulub is defining a time of the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, the fifth mass extinction event on Earth, caused by an asteroid that struck Earth 66 million years ago. And this led to the extinction of most of the dinosaurs. Professor of geochemistry at Curtin University, Professor Cleety Grice, gave me samples from a core drilling from the crater that was actually caused by that asteroid and is now in what is now the Gulf of Mexico. I created ceramic replicas of the original pieces, and then I took a chemical analysis of those rock materials. And from that analysis, I recomposed the chemistry of that extinction event into these ceramic glazes. There's 15 different samples in this work. And you can see here, there's a break in the line of the installation, the extinction boundary between rocks that were impacted by the asteroid and rocks that formed after impact. So you have post-impact, which is the first 5 samples, formed from sediments coming into the crater with tsunamis after the impact. And then the rocks below the line, these rocks were actually impacted by the asteroid and they were chemically altered by that impact. It's called a suvite breccia and it's only formed when an asteroid hits the Earth. This line gives you the overall chemistry of that extinction event. And then these 2 lines, it's as if you're zooming into particular elements to get a better kind of visual understanding of that chemical change. Extinction, or the ashes, the remains of living things, recontribute back to the Earth in a way that is sustaining. So you have a kind of a very catastrophic moment of death and extinction, and then you have the continued rebirth and redevelopment of life on Earth after the event. There's also a deep time connection between Chicxulub and Seine River Basin because Seine River Basin is also very closely related to the Cretaceous time period. So the glaze in that work is a really strong presentation of abundance of calcium. And this comes from ancient sea creatures that perished during the Cretaceous period. It's so wonderful to see Seine River Basin, which is in the collection of the Museum of Contemporary Art, surrounded by its friends. Manchester Driftwood, Seine River Basin and Drowned River Valley all engage with river systems and water. So while Manchester Driftwood is this whirlpool sort of accumulation of plant material on the river's edges, Seine River Basin shows more of the reflection of plants on water. And so you have this doubling of forms. I find riverways are like a very interesting site because they have often witnessed the full history and changes of Earth's environment, including human industrialization. So rivers become ports, become the mouth, the entry and exit zones, the places at which materials are transported across the world. So water carries stories, and it carries mineralogy of time. It also weathers rocks. So the sediments within rivers are a site of a combined chemical sort of narrative of time, geology, and humanity. After the colonisation of this land, the early settlement was trading in salt, as it was such a sort of a rare commodity. And people would sit by the river and boil pots of water in these kind of communal salt harvesting groups around Sydney and Sydney Harbour. Drowned River Valley kind of leaned into this history to tell that story. Throughout the first month of the Biennale of Sydney in 2018, on Cockatoo Island, the audience was invited to actually make these small salt vessels. And then the glaze comes from introducing salt into the kiln at very high temperatures. This work is very special to me as one of the earlier works, and a lot of people are really drawn into this work, I think because it has involved that kind of collaborative production process. The clay itself has sandstone incorporated into it, and these painted walls, one is also made from the ochre and the clay washed off Sydney sandstone. This rock, Sydney sandstone, is also called Hawkesbury sandstone. It's the primary dominant rock formation under the Sydney Basin, and it connects to the Central Coast, the Blue Mountains, Southern Highlands, and the Illawarra. It's quite an iconic material that's synonymous with the Sydney landscape as well as architecture. A lot of the colonial buildings, sandstone bricks were used to build some of the earlier buildings. The other painting application is made from coal ash from Araring Power Station on Lake Macquarie. In that area, a lot of the coal ash dams are placed around Lake Macquarie and have had a negative sort of ecological impact on the waterways there. There's a great deal of work being done by community and industry to improve and mitigate that. These painted walls are my way of drawing the sort of connections, the material connections through the glazes in the site. And it's using raw materials that you find within the glazes in different ways within the exhibition. And it's also an interesting way to see that aesthetic translation. I see all these works as like old friends in a way, because they are all related. And so is the audience to these works. That's the big takeaway, is that the chemistry that's retained within these narratives is also a part of human elemental chemistry and elemental life. I would say that my work is a translation of a language. So plants do have a story to tell. And I think that ash glazes are such an important and significant material for the expression of environmental stories. I hope that my work sparks conversations around a greater awareness of human beings and our impact on the environment, to really shed light on how certain sections of humanity are chemically contributing as well to like our current extinction event. I'm going to continue working on extinction events to make my way back through time, through the fourth, third, second and first extinction events. Once I start something, I have to complete it.